Welcome to the Dream Huge podcast, where we'll talk with real estate investors, entrepreneurs, business leaders, athletes, and more to inspire you with their success stories so you can work hard, never give up, and dream huge. And now, let's start the show.
Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Dream Huge podcast, man. Super excited for this one today. We love to share success stories from other huge dreamers, folks in the real estate business, entrepreneurs, movers, shakers, influencers, and more. And hopefully these stories will help to motivate and inspire you to also dream huge, baby. And today we are joined by my very special guest, Mr. Brian Seidensticker. Mr. Brian Seidensticker, the founder and partner at Last Best Partners. We're going to talk some tax sales. We're going to talk some real estate investing, and who knows where it's going to go from there. Brian, let's start with this. How you doing today, sir?
Well, I'm good, Pete. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Good. Thanks for hopping on. Disclaimer, for those just joining us, I did take a baseball to the face about 3 weeks ago, so it's still healing well, so don't be alarmed. It's not part of my Halloween costume. It may be, actually, but I got 20/20 vision. We're healing well. The show must go on, as they say. So, Brian, why don't we start with talking about tax sales, what it is you do there, and maybe educating some folks on that side of it.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if it helps, but I usually find folks, find some value in at least understanding what the heck, what is a tax sale? What's the difference between tax lien, tax deed? So I'll try to keep it high level, but maybe people come out the other end having way more understanding than most folks do, because the reality is, 99% of folks out there pay their property taxes and don't even think about, well, what happens if I don't pay my property taxes? And that's really where I'll say my story begins is for the property owners that don't pay their property taxes for whatever reason. And I'll caveat everything I say. I guess I'm not an attorney and I'm not a CPA, right? And I will also say I know enough that you can take my description and it's going to be applied slightly different from one state to the next. And so not any state, quite frankly, uses this exact process. But what happens if you don't pay your property taxes is who gets hurt by that is the county, right? Or the jurisdiction. In some states, it's actually by the city, but the county who is looking to balance their budget, right? That money goes to pay firemen, policemen, teachers, pave the roads and that sort of thing. And so any dollar that they're missing obviously has a detriment. And it's one thing if it's a single taxpayer for a couple grand, probably not the end of the world, but in some counties, that can be, I think the largest tax sale typically on an annual basis is Cook County, Illinois, which is Chicago. I mean, it can be, a couple $100 million, right? And that's a very large line item, right? And so if they don't have that money, then there's a lot of teachers that don't get paid. There's a lot of roads that don't get paved. And that's a pretty big impact. So the whole reason behind the whole tax sale space is to it was a mechanism that allowed counties or jurisdictions to balance their budget, right? A way of going and collecting that amount that's due. And so what happens initially is what I'm going to describe as a tax lien sale, right? And there's usually an auction. There's different ways of having the sale, but it's a deal that's made between the jurisdiction or the county, right? And the investor, right? The third party. And the deal that's essentially made is the county says, hey, I've got these tax liens, or I've got these properties with unpaid taxes. I'd like that amount, right, so I can go spend it the way it needs to be spent. What I can do for you as an investor is, there is a, by state statute, an amount that I can charge, right? Call it interest or penalty, right? To that taxpayer if and when they pay their property taxes, and most property owners do. And I can give that back to you. And then as collateral for that, I can put a lien on that property. So if the property owner never pays their property taxes, you'll have, something that you can act upon. Now, the key component is that the investor is buying what I'll call a tax lien or a tax certificate. It's an interest in the property, not ownership of the property. And so I like to compare it. Most people seem to understand the way mortgages work. It's like a micro mortgage, right? Mortgage holders don't own your property. They have an interest in the property. And if you don't pay your mortgage, then the mortgage holder is going to start a foreclosure on your property. And tax liens essentially act very similar to that.
So this is different than going to the sheriff's sale and just purchasing the property for cash, correct?
Correct. And so that's step two, right, in the story. So what happens if the property owner never pays their property taxes? So after a period of time, which can be 6 months in some states, can be 5 years in other states. After a period of time, the lien holder, right, the investor from the previous story, has the right to start a foreclosure, just I guess similar to like a mortgage foreclosure process, right? Hey, you owe me this money, right? Please pay, right? And if you don't, then it can result in the sale of the property, just like a mortgage foreclosure. And the proceeds from that sale, the property, go to paying the tax lien holder. Now, that is what you call the sheriff sale, which is what they call them. I guess we're both here in Ohio, but in other states they call them tax deed auctions. We refer them as tax deeds because it's just the most common name nationwide. But that is where the purchaser in that scenario isn't buying just interest or a lien, right? They're actually buying the property. You get a treasurer's deed or quitclaim deed, a sheriff's deed, right? There's different names, but you're getting ownership of the property. Now there's other stuff that you got to go through to perfect that title. It's called the quiet title process, etc. But the tax sale process is essentially a mechanism for from an investors in this on the podcast either make money, kind of like a lender, right? Like a micro mortgage lender, right? Your note holder. And so if you don't like all of the pain that comes with property ownership, but you also don't get the potential upside of property ownership, then stick in the lien world, right? If you like real estate and you're wanting to own real estate, then tax deeds, I'd say, is just another mechanism for real estate investors to acquire real estate, and ideally at a discount. So anyway, Pete, that's my first answer. You'll learn quickly. I'm not real good at like short and sweet, but I like to make it as short as possible, but at least thorough so people understand what the heck I'm talking about. But that's the difference between a tax lien and a tax deed. And when I say tax sale, I mean all of the above in the space.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about investors who may be jumping online to buy one of these at one of these auctions. You mentioned you're in Akron, Ohio. We are here in Mansfield, Ohio. What does it look like from the investor side? What's the process? What does the auction look like? Do they have to come up with 100% cash at closing and all of that?
Yes, I guess from a tax lien perspective, so you're buying a note is essentially what you're buying, a lien on the property. What happens is the county publishes a list of the parcels and the amounts that are due, right? This is usually weeks. We typically start tracking them roughly 4 weeks before the auction occurs, right? And that list, typically has at least a parcel number, an amount due, maybe the current owner information, right? Not a whole lot else, to be successful. But you do have to do your property underwriting, because there's going to be stuff on there that has no value, like a mailbox or a sidewalk, right? When you start looking at a parcel map of a county, there's some weird ones, right? And so, the county is not going to peel anything out. That's kind of it's the investor's responsibility to do their own research. But you're going to, underwrite those liens, right? Those potential properties, and then ultimately decide what you're willing to bid. Now, the bidding process varies, right? In Florida, it's actually called a bid down method. And so it's a percentage that you're willing to accept as an investor, right? Hey, I'm going to put out $1,000 on that lien, right? Every investor is going to put out the same amount, but what you're willing to accept on an interest, right, return, right, is what you're bidding down. I bid 18%. The next person, I bid 17%, 16% on down, right? Till, at some point people go, this isn't worth it, right? Why would I, bid 0% and put money out to make nothing, right? So there's that method of bidding. And then there's what's called a premium bid, which is, more like a traditional auction. I'll bid 1,000. Well, I'll bid 1,200. It's not going up in huge increments because the interest you're going to earn is usually based off the original amount, not what you end up bidding, right? And so there's a bid up method as well. But the auction occurs similar to how you would imagine, right? Either it's live, right? You're raising your paddle. I would bid X dollars. More and more, and definitely post-COVID, there's the majority of counties now that are online auctions. And so you're sitting in front of your computer clicking a button, right, as far as the mechanism. At the end of the auction for tax liens, you're going to essentially be required to send in whatever total amount you bid, right? You probably had a deposit that you had to put in before the auction, 5 or 10% of what you plan to bid. And the rest of it is due, I'll say, immediately, whether it's, by the end of the day or a couple of days later. You don't have 30 or 60 days to go get your capital. But that's the tax lien side. And again, every state is slightly different. On the tax deed side, the function is very similar to any other property auction. If anybody's been to or participated in like a mortgage foreclosure or an REO auction, like auction.com, you're on a platform, you've decided what you're willing to buy that property at, and you're bidding up, right? And so you're not bidding like fractions of the value of the property. You're now bidding up to maybe full value of the property, to acquire it. So that I won't go into as many details on that front because I think people in general are a little more familiar with how a standard auction works, and tax deed auctions are really no different. The nuance that you mentioned, which is very key, is that you typically require to have the cash right then and there, right? And there's some states that give you a little leeway, but most states, you have to have in cashier's checks at the end of the auction. And I've been to auctions literally when you are done bidding, they pause all of the other properties until you come down and provide your cash before they continue. And so it's a very cash intensive investment opportunity, unlike buying a property off the MLS. You can get under contract, you get 30 days, you go get a lender. Tax deed auctions don't give you that luxury.
You will also see like a mortgage foreclosure auction versus a tax sale auction. What are the differences there?
Let's say functionally, as far as attending the auction, they're very similar, right? I think the difference is, typically the mortgage foreclosure auctions have a minimum amount, right? Which is usually the mortgage amount that is significantly higher than the starting bid for tax deed auctions, right? The starting bid on tax deed auction is going to be whatever the taxes were due plus whatever interest is due to the lien holder plus whatever other fees that were applied along the life cycle of that foreclosure. And so, for let's say a $200,000 house, the opening bid for a tax deed auction is more like 20 grand. On a mortgage foreclosure, that opening bid is more like 150 grand, right? Depending on the amount of mortgage. So it's just now that doesn't mean the tax deeds won't be bid up to 150, but the starting point is typically a lot lower.
How does you and your company make money off of this process or add value?
Yeah. Well, at least in what we still do today, and how I got started in this space is really as a software and data analytics provider, right? I like to use the term, most people are familiar with the Zillow. Right? It's like a Zillow for just tax sales, right? Both liens and deeds. And so you can't go on Zillow and find all available, tax liens for sale out there. That's just not something that they compile, at least not today, or the tax deeds. Whereas you go on, Tax Resources, our website, taxresources.com, that platform is what tracks that. And so when we got started in this space, what did not exist is anywhere that aggregates that information at any scale. I say the simple answer is like, where are these auctions occurring? When are they occurring? What are the properties that are included in that auction? And can you tell me a little more about those properties? That didn't exist, right? You had to call the county, you had to track the county, you got to list. And then like in New Jersey, and still today, like the list is literally a newspaper. We have to subscribe to a local newspaper to get the printing that has all the properties that are going to be in it, right? And so there's just not a whole lot of help or access. And so what Tax Resources was and is that access point for anybody that wants to invest in the space. You can go on, you can put in your criteria. Today, it's very easy. You can put in, hey, I'm looking for bowling alleys, right? And you can see all of the bowling alleys going up for sale nationwide. And you could not do that even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. And the platform allows you to do that. And that's really, I'll say, product one, or how we're involved in the space. We are also...
Is that a paid membership or... Okay. And how much is that?
There's different levels depending on the type of access. The entry level is $97 a month. It's not cheap, right? Certainly not for the if you don't know what you're doing, you might want to sign up. We do have a free trial, right? You want to sign up for that for a period of time to check it out, but you probably don't want to spend the money just to let it sit there, right? So you got to be fairly serious about it, and then on up to, we have what we call Premier level, which is full access, if you will, if you want to do nationwide searches for very specific asset classes, and that's at a higher price point. So anyway, that's the platform.
We are doing this at a smaller scale. So when we started doing flips and really running the auction circuit, my partner, Mark Gray, he ran some type of software where he was able to pull from auction.com, Richland sheriff sale, Crawford County sheriff sale. But we're still looking at the market like this, Brian, like Just with your view, it sounds to me like you have a wide open, like you compared it to Zillow, nationwide view on these tax sale properties. So yeah, we were doing a much smaller scale, and I can't wait to tell folks and educate folks about this. I think this really adds a tremendous amount of value.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think that's, we were as far as we know, we're the only one so far that, we track about 9,000 auctions a year, about 2 million properties included in that. And it is a very wide array, right, or nationwide of as far as being able to apply, hey, I'm looking for 3-bedroom, 2-bed houses with a value of $200,000, right? Those are not available in every auction. And a lot of people get frustrated with the space, or historically got frustrated because you do all this work for nothing, right? Whether it redeem or it's all vacant lots, but you had to research all 300 properties to get to the 300th one. You're like, man, I was just looking for a house and they're all vacant lots. You don't know until you do all that research. Instead of spending hours or days figuring that answer, go do it in 10 seconds. That's really the intent of the platform, is to help investors be more successful at a larger scale.
This is great, dude. Okay, so you mentioned investors. So talk to us about your fund and what you do on that side of your business, on the real estate investing side as well.
Yeah, well, so really starting in 2020, we'd been compiling data for over 10 years, and we went to a couple groups, including a bank, trying to, hey, there's some value here. I don't know if this is the best comparison, but I'm going to use it. Kanye West had a heck of a time finding anybody to I would say rap to his tunes, and so he tried it himself, and obviously at one time was very successful producer and rapper, right? And that we felt a little bit similar, where we had all this data, we're trying to find somebody to take advantage of it, because we knew what stuff was selling for. We knew areas where there was like no deal to be had. We knew the areas where there was amazing deals to be had, and we just couldn't convince anybody to take advantage of it, oddly enough. And so we said, well, if we can, so like, we've never done this, but let's maybe start a fund and see if we can make this work. And we were lucky enough to find somebody that was willing to, say, bet on us and do a proof of concept. And that we did Fund Capital Fund 1 in 2020, and placed about $1.5 million in the space, doing what we said we could do. We're very successful doing that. And then went back and did a proof of scale, Fund 2 in 2022, and basically scaled that from 1.5 to 5 million. And then in the process of doing that, had a group that said, you know what, now that you know what you're doing, that's pretty cool. Why don't we enable you at a pretty larger scale? And so we've been doing it. Well, we're at about a $40 million fund right now, on our way, to trying to grow that to about 70 million over the next year or so. But it's a unique model, right? If we're not, we prefer, right, and this is the only way that we've figured out how to make it work, we like to work with local partners, right? And so we're partnering with somebody there in the area, typically an existing tax deed buyer or foreclosure buyer, right? And they might be cash limited in some way. And we say, hey, there's a lot of data. We can point you in the right direction. We can also give you capital, and we can work on a profit share structure, right? And that's really what our fund model is working with, profit share partners at a local level. So there's opportunities to work with on that end, right? As a partner, right? In the deals that were being done. And then it is a fund. It's a 506c fund that we do operate. And there's plenty of folks that we've talked to over the years that said, hey, I really like the space. It's a lot of work. I don't have the time, or I don't have the want to get involved in the space to that degree. Can I just invest in your fund and take advantage that way? And so that's why we tried to marry the two, and we operate the fund. There's investors that can invest in the fund, and then there's investors, or what we call profit share partners, on the other side that we partner with on a local basis, just trying to enable folks to do what they're doing successfully, just on a larger scale.
Yeah, so whether you want to be active or passive, you've got options for both types of investors.
Exactly.
Yeah, love it. Brian, how did you get into this space, and where do you see your company going from here?
Yeah, I laugh or chuckle because I got into the space on the wrong end of a tax lien. Quite frankly, I'll say, flipping properties, not as a full-time gig, but I had a couple of properties that we were flipping in Montana, where I'm originally from. This is 2007 timeframe, and I think most people probably know where this story is going, but ended up upside down on one of them during the crash, and ended up with a notice for a pending tax lien sent to us. Right. The weird thing is in Montana, every tax lien holder, this is only Montana to my knowledge, every tax lien potential buyer has to send a certified letter to the property owner, right? Basically saying, I might buy the tax lien on your property. And so I didn't just get one letter from the county like most states. I got 30, 40 certified letters from different groups, which at one end was like, holy crap, what's going on here? Hindsight 2020, if I had gotten one just from the county, probably wouldn't have thought twice about it. But the fact that I got all these from investment groups, right, and such capital, et cetera, is what led me to investigate what is this tax lien thing all about. And that's really what pointed me in the direction of tax liens. And within a couple of years, we were buying, instead of buying properties, I raised friends and family money type of thing, and started buying tax liens on the side in Montana and Wyoming, and did that for a couple of years until the tax sale resources. We were building this database, TSR, as an internal tool. Had somebody suggest, hey, you should make that public. Maybe you can cover some of your overhead. Made it public, and 2 years later, we were no longer buying tax liens because we were making a whole lot more money, selling our platform. And this is 2012 timeframe, and really got out of buying liens and anything really in the space because we didn't want to compete with our customers until we created Mountain North Capital in 2020. Anyway, that's a little bit of my origin story.
That's awesome. Our biggest losses are often our best lessons in life. And the tuition that we pay when we learn is just, feeding our own future and our own operation. And it's our own education. That's the tuition we pay on our losses, and we learn. And that's great that you created a whole huge company from that lesson. So taxsaleresources.com. Check it out, folks. Great resource for tax sale properties. It's right there in the name. Love it. Taxsaleresources.com. Also, lastbestpartners.com for everything on the investing side as well. Brian, any final closing thoughts before I let you go?
No, I really appreciate you having me on. Hopefully folks learned a thing or two. For anybody that is interested in this space, I would highly suggest, doing more research beyond hopping in and buying something. There's good and bad, being in an unregulated space. You can physically go register for an auction tomorrow and buy one. I would recommend not doing that until you at least, speak to an attorney familiar with the space in the state that you want to buy them in, and get a really good understanding before you just, hop in. I gave you, I'd say, the very, very surface level information. It sounds exciting. The devil's in the details. Do your research before you hop in. I hope at least somebody out there feels compelled to make the leap and hopefully found our information useful. So thank you, Pete.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Brian Seidensticker. We're going to hook up for lunch next time on Visiting Family up in Cuyahoga Falls, Akron area, man. This is going to be a great relationship. And you are out here helping folks out, and that's what it's all about. So helping others. Thank you for taking the time today, Brian. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening to the Dream Huge podcast. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And as always, remember the rules. Work hard, never give up, and dream huge. And visit taxsaleresources.com. Let's see the guns, Brian. Dream huge, baby. Yeah. Have a good one, buddy. Thank you, man.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you for listening to the Dream Huge podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. For more inspiring content, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Dream Huge Realty and on TikTok at Dream Huge Inc. Until next time.